A tale of two nations. Which two nations? Diplomacy is a 7-player game. In this match, I played as France, and a student of mine played as Italy. We didn't arrange to play in this match together. It just so happened that we ended up in the same Gunboat game for the Nexus 2020 Gunboat tournament. When I started off this match, I was in very high spirits about my chances. I took a survey of the players in the game and thought, I could probably beat any of these guys. I mean, there's some good players in there to be sure, but none of them seemed beyond my ability to beat. And of course, I drew France. If you're familiar with the BrotherBored blog, then you know that I think that France is the strongest power on offense in gunboat diplomacy. I feel at my highest level of confidence when I get that country assigned to me at the beginning. However, it seems that the other players in the game, they read the BrotherBored blog as well, and that caused me a couple of disadvantages during the match. Number one, they were familiar with my opinion about the anti-France metagame, that England and Germany and Italy should do some efforts to bring France down in the beginning. I was harassed by Italy early in the match. England and Germany were allied together and fought against me. And boy, oh boy, was it a tough match for me. And I respect that. Kudos to you, rivals, who basically crushed me this game because I think that was what you needed to do to win. In fact, later I heard from the German player that a few turns in, that player had figured out that France was probably BrotherBored, and if that player couldn't find a way to work together with others and bring me down to a sizable level, maybe just a couple of centers, who knows how dangerous I would be in the long run. And kudos to you, my rival, because that's probably the right inference. Let's talk about the particulars of the match. In the beginning, as France, I got off to a perfectly normal start. I got my neutral centers in Portugal and Spain, and I was beset by some harassment from Italy. England opened against me. Germany, I was not able to get Germany on my side. And then the grind began. Turn after turn after turn after turn of England and Germany, relentless in their attacks. The match had a time limit. The game could only go on until 1918. And during the match, all I was thinking was, if I could somehow just defend a little bit longer, if I could show that I'm unbreakable, England or Germany will get worried that they don't have a chance at being the board topper or at solo winning. If they don't get some center somewhere, they'll get nervous, they'll get greedy, they'll start attacking each other, and then my opportunity will appear to start expanding. That's how I feel when I'm France, that's how I play the game. And those turns went by, turn after turn. For those of you who are maybe unfamiliar with or doubting of my assessment of France's strong defensive abilities in gunboat diplomacy, well, now's my time to educate you. When you're playing regular diplomacy, press diplomacy, aka classic diplomacy, the players can communicate in words. And when they're able to speak to each other in words, they can agree to make supported attacks in coordination with each other. But in gunboat diplomacy, there's no such thing. So when the English and German player are attacking me, and they want to make supported attacks in order to break through my strong French defenses, not only do they have to guess what I'm going to do correctly because I can block their attacks to a certain extent, but they also have to guess what the other player is going to do. They have to guess what their ally is going to do. And this increases the capabilities of France in gunboat diplomacy to a level you don't see in press diplomacy. And indeed, for years and years and years and years in the match, I was able to defend against a completely concentrated attack from England and Germany. They didn't let up. They didn't betray each other. But because I have considerable skill in outguessing what the other players are going to do for their moves, I was able to block their moves for a long time. Eventually, of course, there were some guesses I didn't make. I made guesses that were incorrect. Eventually, I succumbed to those incorrect guesses and started losing some of my home centers. I lost Brest and Paris, and once that happened, I started getting ground down to a nub, and only then did one of my enemies decide to attack each other, which is probably the wise move. And at that point, all I was doing once I was down to 3 centers was just trying to hold out as long as I could to somehow make it into a draw. I held out a little hope that I could somehow recover one of my home centers and maybe make it back into the game, neglecting the turn time limit at that time. I forgot about it briefly. So I think once it was near the end of the game and I was down to just a couple centers, all the best I could do was make it into the draw. And, by the way, I defended into the draw the way that France can. The best way to get into a draw is France, which is to give up my home centers in Brest and Paris first, retreated to Marseille, giving up Portugal and Spain last, and holding out in Portugal as the last center. The reason why Portugal is so valuable when you're just trying to make it into a draw is that Portugal uniquely is the only supply center on the map that is bordered only by 2 other provinces, Mid-Atlantic Ocean, the sea province, and Spain, a land province. If there are enemy players who are in control of Mid-Atlantic Ocean and Spain, it's unlikely that in a gunboat game you're going to be kicked out of Portugal, because one of those players will have to support the other into Portugal, and oftentimes they're unwilling to do that, or they don't have an incentive to do that, or whatever. If this had been a draw-size scoring game where the players were given a split of the pot just equal to the fact that they got into the draw, I would feel very good about my defensive play. Unfortunately for me, the tournament was scored with a scoring system that takes into account how many supply centers you have at the end of the match. And since I only had 1, I had a pitiful score. My dear student, Italy, I am so impressed to learn that you deduced who I was relatively early in the match, and to find out that you chose your strategy as Italy based around the idea that I was probably unlikely to be any threat to you early on given my theories about how to play France. Truly, I love to hear that. I have heard from a friend of mine who I've played games with since childhood, including diplomacy. We've played gunboat diplomacy many times over the years. He says, "BrotherBored, I know who you are by the end of 1902. Really. He said that he can figure out who I am by the end of 1902 just based on the moves I chose. And I think that's right. I often can figure out who the other players are in the match just based on how they're choosing moves a couple turns in. Definitely by 1904, I have a strong sense of the player's capabilities, intentions, and so on. And to learn that there are other players out there who either have learned this from me or they've learned it on their own, they appreciate that gunboat diplomacy is so much deeper than it seems, that your personality does come to light. Your tendencies and habits are detectable as you. That just seeing how I've moved my pieces around on a board, another human being can say, that's BrotherBored. I know that has to be BrotherBored. Just looking at those pieces, it's unmistakable, like a calling card. That's really interesting to me. I love hearing that. One last thing. I apologize to my student Italy. I stole your home center in Venice, debilitating you from having a good chance of getting a score in the match. That was a completely ruthless action on my part. I did that just to keep my supply center count as high as possible, with the hopes that I might be able to regain some centers in the future if I didn't have to disband those units. Expect nothing less from BrotherBored, especially in a gunboat diplomacy game. My style is rather ruthless and usually works out for me. It didn't so much this game. I have one lesson that I will learn for myself going forward. I realize since the other players in the match are familiar with my writings, that my blog is popular enough to have influenced how players play Gunboat Diplomacy, and they can recognize my style of play if they know I'm in the match. I should put in a greater effort to disguise my abilities early on. Make some moves that I don't normally make. Maybe even some moves that look like they could be blunders, so that players misunderstand, think I'm not that good of a player, and prioritize someone else as an enemy. In a word, sandbagging. Sandbagging is a wonderful diplomatic strategy when you get targeted for being a little too intimidating. And with that, I end this video recording. Thank you very much for playing in the Nexus Gunboat Diplomacy Tournament. Everybody who played with me, everybody who played in the tournament, and most of all, thank you to my Patreon patrons. It's because of your sponsorship that I felt inspired to begin making video content for the BrotherBored blog. Thank you very much.